Whispers of the crimson tide. The massive wooden gates of the Voidborn fortress creaked open, revealing a harrowing scene of destruction. A group of mages stumbled through, their robes shredded and stained with blood, their faces ghostly pale with exhaustion and terror. Once proud warriors of the Voidborn now appeared as mere shadows of their former selves, clutching their wounds as they collapsed into the courtyard. Kaida, still reeling from the loss of Ulrich, rushed forward alongside Soren and Darien. "Get the healers," she commanded, her voice sharp with urgency as she knelt beside an injured mage whose left arm hung limp, crimson streaks seeping through the dark fabric of his robes. His ragged breathing and vacant eyes betrayed the trauma he had endured. "They came out of nowhere," he rasped, his voice weak and trembling. "The crimson-armored ones, they destroyed everything." Soren's expression hardened as he signaled for the medics, who swiftly began tending to the wounded. "Easy, Kale. Take your time. Tell us exactly what happened." Kale coughed violently, wincing as a healer's glowing hands pressed against his shoulder. His dark eyes darted to Kaida, flickering with a blend of awe and lingering dread. "They weren't human," he whispered, his voice filled with raw disbelief. "I swear it, Commander. No hesitation, no emotion, just slaughter." Kaida's jaw tightened. "Start from the beginning." Kale swallowed hard, his eyes closing briefly before he spoke. "We were stationed at Twilight Outpost, patrolling as usual. Everything was quiet then. Then they came." His eyes snapped open, wide with terror. No warning, no banners, they just appeared. The crimson ones, their armor glowed under the moonlight, and they moved like ghosts, silent, efficient. Before we could raise the alarm, they were inside. Kaida exchanged a tense glance with Leora, who stood silently in the shadows, her gaze razor sharp. Did they take anything? Were they looking for something? The atmosphere is thick with tension as they prepare for the impending battle against a mysterious enemy. Kale shook his head slowly, his voice trembling. "They didn't take supplies. They didn't even seem to care about us. They just killed, and their weapons, gods, their weapons." He shivered violently. An older mage with streaks of gray in his hair spoke from a stretcher where medics tended his wounds. "They used weapons that nullified magic. Spells collapsed the moment they were cast. Barriers fell like parchment. We were utterly defenseless." Kaida's stomach twisted. Magic nullifying technology. That explained why Ulrich's shields had shattered so easily. They used energy-based projectiles, not like the Lightbringer's magic. This was darker. I saw a man, his entire chest just disappear, turning to ash in an instant. Soren paled, his usual composure cracking. "Unraveling magic, that should be impossible, unless..." His voice trailed off, deep in thought. "They weren't invincible, but they didn't bleed like us. We struck one down, and when its helmet cracked open, there was nothing inside, just swirling black mist." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. Kaida's mind raced. "Are you saying they aren't alive?" Kale shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe they were once, but now, they felt like constructs, like something built, not born." Darien, who had been listening silently, finally spoke, his crimson eyes glinting with intrigue. "So we're fighting empty suits of armor that fire magic-destroying death beams. Fantastic." Kaida ignored his remark, turning back to Kale. "Did you learn anything useful? Weaknesses?" Kale hesitated before nodding slightly. "They aren't fast. They rely on numbers and precision. We managed to slow them down with hit-and-run tactics, but we couldn't stop them. They didn't chase us far. It was like they had a purpose, and once it was fulfilled, they left." Kaida rubbed her temples, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. "A purpose? What exactly were they after?" "We don't know," the older mage said gravely. "But they erased everything, every scroll, every relic, even the bodies of our fallen comrades. They wanted nothing left behind." Kaida's stomach churned. These enemies weren't here for conquest. They were here to obliterate history itself. Hours later, the war room buzzed with tension. Maps were spread across the table, fresh crimson markers indicating the latest attacks. Faces around the table were grim. the atmosphere thick with uncertainty and exhaustion. "We can't keep losing ground like this," Soren said, his voice laced with frustration. "We need to strike back." Leora traced a finger across the map, her sharp eyes calculating. A direct assault would be suicide. "They don't fight like us. We need to understand their strategy first. They didn't pursue the retreating mages because they weren't the objective." Kaida crossed her arms. Then what was their objective? Ray, leaning against the wall, tapped a finger against a circled area. "If I had to guess, ancient sites. Every place they've hit had some connection to Voidborn history. Archives, ruins, relic storage. Maybe they're looking for something." Soren's eyes lit up with realization. "If they're targeting ancient sites, we might be able to predict their next move." Kaida nodded, exhaling slowly. "Then let's do it. We'll set a trap at the next site they might attack, and when they show up..." Darian grinned, finishing her thought. "We hit them hard." Soren still looked uneasy. "And if it's another massacre?" Kaida clenched her fists. "Then at least we'll know what we're dealing with." Days later, Kaida and her team stood at the desolate ruins of Ravenstone Keep, an abandoned Voidborn site, rich with forgotten artifacts and history. The towering stone walls, once a beacon of Voidborn power, were now crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. Dust and debris littered the courtyard, masking the once proud carvings of mythical Voidborn heroes. Kaida's eyes scanned the landscape, noting the strategic vantage points they could use. The remnants of broken towers and collapsed corridors provided ample cover, and the thick fog that rolled in from the mountains lent an eerie quality to the site. "This place feels cursed, perfect," Kaida replied with a grim smile. "If it unnerves us, it'll unnerve them too." Leora, perched on a crumbling ledge above, signaled down to Kaida. "Movement, north perimeter." Kaida's pulse quickened as she gestured to the others. Soren began murmuring under his breath, weaving intricate protective enchantments that shimmered faintly in the dim light, forming an invisible barrier around them. Darian unsheathed his sword with a steely precision, his grip tightening as he scanned the horizon, his muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. The weight of the moment pressed down on them all, the distant rustling of the wind blending with the soft whispers of arcane power. A low, resonant hum filled the air, reverberating through the ruins like the distant growl of an oncoming storm. Then from the mist they emerged. The Crimson Warrior stepped forward, their armor glistening under the moonlight with an ominous sheen. The battle had begun. The air crackled with the hum of energy weapons, the ruins now bathed in an eerie red glow as the Crimson Warriors advanced with machine-like precision. Kaida barely had time to react as the initial blast sent debris scattering around them, the force of the impact rattling her bones. "Darian, cover the right flank!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Darian, already in motion, pivoted with the grace of a seasoned warrior, his blade clashing against the armored exterior of one of the Crimson Warriors. Sparks erupted in a violent cascade as his sword struck, the reverberation sending tremors through his arms. He adjusted his stance quickly, rolling with the force of the impact. "These things are tougher than they look," he grunted, gritting his teeth as he drove forward again, this time aiming for the weak joints between the plates. The Crimson Warrior responded with mechanical precision, deflecting the blow effortlessly and countering with a crushing strike of its own. Darian barely managed to parry in time, his muscles straining against the unrelenting strength of his opponent. "I could use a little help here," he called out, his eyes flicking toward Kaida, who was already weaving a defensive spell to shield him from another incoming attack. Leora moved with calculated precision, her form melting seamlessly into the shadows as she assessed the enemy with a tactical eye. As she ducked beneath a sweeping mechanical strike, her muscles coiled with trained efficiency, twisting in a fluid motion that allowed her to drive both blades deep into the warrior's side. But the respite was short-lived. With an unnatural speed that defied organic movement, the Crimson Entity retaliated, its gauntlet slicing through the air with terrifying precision. Kaida braced herself, feet anchored against the shattered ground as she tightened her grip on the Orb of Equinox. The ancient artifact pulsed in her hands, radiating a dark, almost sentient energy that surged through her veins like a torrential flood. With a commanding thrust, she unleashed tendrils of shadow that writhed and coiled through the air with serpentine grace, striking out toward the nearest Crimson Warrior. The inky darkness latched onto the figure, penetrating the gaps in its armor and siphoning the residual essence that animated its unholy form. Yet even as she pressed forward, Kaida sensed resistance. The Crimson entity's core pulsed with an eerie persistence, adapting, recalibrating. "Not this time," she whispered, determination burning in her eyes as she redoubled her efforts. "They're adapting too quickly," Soren called out, his hands moving rapidly in arcane gestures. Layers of protective wards flickered to life around the group, absorbing incoming blasts from the Crimson Warriors. "We need to end this now." Rai crouched behind a fallen column, watched the scene unfold with a calculating gaze. "They're targeting the ruins, not us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're looking for something." Kaida's eyes flicked toward the scattered remnants of Voidborn relics that lay half-buried beneath rubble. "They want the artifacts," she realized. "We can't let them have them." She turned to Soren. "How fast can you set up a containment ward?" Soren's brow furrowed. "Not fast enough if they keep firing at me." Rai smirked. "I thought you'd never ask." With a swift motion, he tossed a small vial onto the ground, and a thick cloud of smoke erupted, blanketing the battlefield in a shroud of obscurity. "Cover me!" he called as he dashed toward Soren, blades glinting in the dim light. Kaida seized the opportunity, weaving through the battlefield to reach the ruin's central chamber. The ancient walls pulsed faintly with magic, whispering secrets of forgotten power. Her fingertips brushed against the cold stone, feeling the hum of energy beneath it. "They're after something specific," she murmured, tracing the intricate carvings. The glyphs glowed under her touch, and suddenly a hidden compartment slid open, revealing an obsidian shard pulsing with dark energy. Kaida barely had time to process what she had found before a Crimson Warrior loomed behind her, its weapon charging with deadly precision. She spun, the orb flaring with defensive magic, sending a shockwave that knocked the figure back. It recovered too quickly, stepping forward with relentless purpose. From the shadows, Leora's dagger sliced across the warrior's weapon arm, severing cables and causing sparks to fly. "I've got your back," she said, flashing a confident grin. Kaida tightened her grip around the obsidian shard, feeling its power course through her veins. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice urgent. "This thing, it's what they're after." Darien, his blade dripping with the faint remnants of corrupted mist, appeared at her side. "Then let's make sure they don't get it." As they strategize and prepare for battle at the ancient ruins of Ravenstone Keep, they uncover dark forces that challenge their strength and resolve. Soren, his wards finally holding steady, gestured toward the edge of the ruins. "We fall back to the ridge. If we hold them there, we can use the terrain to our advantage." Kaida nodded, holding the shard tightly against her chest. "Everyone, fall back!" The team moved as one, strategically retreating while covering each other's escape. Kaida stole one last glance at the Crimson Warriors, who had ceased their advance and now stood still, their glowing visors locked onto her. They didn't follow. Instead, they turned their attention to the ruins, scanning for any remnants of what Kaida had uncovered. "They'll be back," Leora said grimly as they reached the safety of the ridge. Kaida took a deep breath, staring at the pulsing shard in her hand. "And next time, we'll be ready."